In 2011, HAL Labs released Kirby's first traditional adventure on a console for the first time since Kirby 64 back in the 2000s. There has been a lot of Kirby games between then, but they were mostly made by other studios with the help of Lab, rather than making a priority Kirby game themselves. And with the start of Return to Dreamland, it pretty much started a brand new era because all the entries going forward focuses mainly on the formula started from this game in particular. And with that, we've got a sequel for Return to Dreamland 3 years later, not on the Wii U, but on the Nintendo 3DS. As besides a Canvas Curse sequel, Kirby never really got a traditional platformer on the Wii U. Although for this case, it was much more different reason why Kirby never got a traditional one on GameCube, as they were having a bit of a development issue with that, which caused multiple games cancelled. With the Wii U's case, it's mostly due to the fact that the 3DS is just more popular, and they could do a lot more things on it and be more successful compared to the Wii U, where they would probably not sell as well. And as for Kirby's Triple Deluxe, I remember seeing teasers for this game, oh my god, 10 years ago, wow. It's really been 10 years. But anyway, so I saw teasers for this game, and I didn't really pick it up. I had a lot more memories with Planet Robobot, but I did eventually get Triple Deluxe about a year after, during when the Switch released. So with this game celebrating its decade-old anniversary, I thought why not try out this game for the very first time in a really long time. Especially considering that we've got recent Kirby games on Nintendo Switch, and I want to see how this stacks against the other two. Specifically, Star Allies and Return to Dreamland Deluxe, because these are two 2D platformers. But before we start, I have to say is that out of all the recording sessions I've had for videos, this one in particular gave me the most pain. So in my previous video, I reviewed Fire Emblem Awakening, which was pretty much testing the waters against the Citra emulator that I used to record it. That way I can have a better way to record 3DS footage. Unfortunately, when I was doing Triple Deluxe, I had severe issues recording this one in particular. So at the midpoint of World 5, I decided to call it quits in recording it for the emulator and just use my 3DS just to play through it myself. And despite the emulator and OBS saying that it was running at 60 FPS and it was gameplay-wise, for some reason when I outported OBS, it was an abysmal frame rate, meaning I could not use the footage at all. So that's when I decided just to restart the entire thing on just playing on a normal 3DS. All I can say is that I like using emulators, but man, sometimes they can be really unstable. But with everything out of the way, let's get started. So the game starts with Kirby relaxing on Dreamland, just enjoying life, eating some fruit, catching fish and such. It's always nice and peaceful. However, later that night, a mysterious beanstalk started growing underneath Kirby's house, as once he wakes up in the morning, he finds himself up in the air all the way in the sky, with Castle Deity being caught in the beanstalk as well. Kirby then tries to enter Castle Deity, but then discovers a mysterious spider creature known as Taranza. As he enters the throne room, he takes out a guard of Waddle Dees, and then kidnaps King Deity, with Kirby going straight after Taranza and see what his plans are with King Deity. The plot in this game is super simple for the most part, but it gets a bit more interesting the more you go deeper into the game. This is one of those Kirby games that went a bit more into world building for the series. And as for the gameplay, it's Kirby. Can't really add too much about the gameplay controls of this game, because it's pretty much your typical Kirby gameplay loop. You can run, jump, float around, and copy enemy abilities. A lot of the abilities from the previous game return to this one with a few brand new ones. Beetle is an interesting one where Kirby can pierce through enemies, which is very satisfying to do so. The bell copy ability has Kirby using bells as weapons, which is actually kind of funny to see since it's him just pretty much bashing enemies' heads with bells. I honestly really like this one. I always like the more weirder and more interesting copy abilities. Archer is pretty cool too, as Kirby wields a bow and arrow to shoot long-range weapons, which is very useful in certain puzzles. And lastly, we have Circus, which has Kirby not turning into a Twitter user, but instead, a circus tent. See, these are the kind of copy abilities I really like, because it's very interesting to turn an entire circus acrobat into a fighting moveset. It just fuels a lot of fun creativity. It's slightly weird control, but it looks really cool to do so. They even include cool Easter eggs with some of the balloon attacks. And all of these abilities are very useful for the bosses, which are still pretty good for Kirby standards. You do have the traditional characters from various bosses, like another variation of Wispy Woods called Flowery Wood, and also Crackle makes an appearance in this game as well. And what makes this cool is that they aren't here just for pandering nostalgia, as they try to do a lot of new things with these two characters. As the level design between Kirby Triple Deluxe and Player Robobot did something slightly unique for the 3DS entries, where it has a bigger emphasis on foreground and background movement. Because throughout the game, you'll find these little warp stars will launch you between the foreground and background. And this is not only used just because they're on a 3D device, as there's a lot of obstacles in the background that will affect the foreground that you're on. Like in this level, for example, where you're getting chased by a giant candy tank. Or one of the later ones, where you're trying to dodge a bunch of Waddle Dee trains going full speed ahead. This reminds me a lot of Yoshi's Island in a way, where in certain levels, you'll see a bunch of change-ups in the background that'll leap all the way to the foreground to attack Yoshi. So it's best to focus on the foreground and background at the same time, especially with the various puzzles to get collectibles. Alright, so this is another trend that Return to Dreamland started, is that there are now main collectibles to find in every level. Not including these special keychains you can find, which are pretty much cosmetics, where you can basically just look around and shake around with the 3DS motion controls. Actually, on that note, there are certain puzzles in this game that heavily uses motion controls, which is very weird to think about that the freaking 3DS game has more motion control puzzles than the actual Wii game. But anyway, so the main collectibles you're finding throughout in this game are the Sun Zone, which are mandatory to do to beat the game. Which is honestly really good, because I always say this before and I'll say this again, you can always make the level design a lot more interesting if you have collectibles like these. And the fact that the Sun Zones are required to beat the game really makes you encouraged to get all the collectibles and find various secrets in the game. That way you're just not simply just zipping through the levels, especially considering the fact this is Kirby, where you could just fly throughout all the level design. So yeah, these are a brand new addition I always love. And while we're at it, another thing that the revitalized 2D Kirby games have are unique gimmicks, which start with the aforementioned Return to Dreamland with the super abilities. But for Triple Deluxe, they added this brand new thing where, throughout the levels, you'll find these miracle fruits. If Kirby eats one of these things, he'll transform into HyperNova, which enhances his inhalability big time. Because holy crap, if Kirby can suck things very powerfully, it got amplified to a freaking 11. I mean, the first thing you do is Kirby eating an entire tree just like that. And I'll be completely honest, I think this is a great improvement compared to the super abilities. Because looking back, those pretty much lean a bit too much towards the spectacle side of everything, because all you do mostly is just press a button every time you see a star pattern. With HyperNova, it still has a lot of spectacle with it, but there's a lot more puzzle and thinking towards it as well. You don't just push through everything, you have to take your time and try to think which is the best solution. But even then, it's still pretty damn cool, and it looks very stunning. I especially like the colors Kirby has when he goes HyperNova. And that's why you should also talk about the graphics, because holy crap, this looks amazing for the Nintendo 3DS. But I wouldn't be too surprised because HAL Labs, since the very beginnings, do a phenomenal job with their game's presentation. And Triple Deluxe is no exception. With Return to Dreamland, the aesthetic looks amazing and I still really love it to this very day, but the environment themings themselves are a bit more Mario-like. As it has the same biomes, like starting with the grass, second desert, beach, snow, you get the idea. But just like DK Returns, that gives it a free pass because they were pretty much trying to revitalize Kirby on consoles at the time. But with Triple Deluxe, they learned more to a more interesting aesthetic, which is a lot more nature-based. With the exception of the second world where it has a lot of candy and such. But I think what really suits this game for me personally is how they do with the colors in this game. Because the visual style and everything just really pops in a way that no other 3DS game has done. And as for the music to the game, to no one's surprise, it is also phenomenal, but I couldn't expect anything else from Kirby. As he goes up there with Mario and Sonic for best soundtracks in any platformer. With my favorite one being from the boss that I'll talk about in a little bit. But before we do so, I think it's best to talk about a tradition that every Kirby has, which is side games. Starting with Kirby's Adventure, there's always been a sub-game for each of the series. Kirby Fighters is pretty much if you put Kirby in a fighting game, where it's a 4v4 similar to Smash Bros., and the last one standing wins. This concept was eventually evolved into its own spin-off on the 3DS eShop, with a sequel on the Nintendo Switch years later. DDD's Drum Dash is basically a small rhythm game as you time your jumps just right to get the most points. And this game also evolved into its own spin-off on the 3DS. And lastly, we have DDD Tour. Now this is pretty much Meta Nightmare from Kirby Superstar Ultra, where instead of playing through the game as Meta Knight, you go through the entirety of Kirby Triple Deluxe as King DDD, with a unique boss fight at the end as Dark Meta Knight returns from the Amazing Mirror. But this is not just a simple, oh look at this cool deep cut. There's actually a story purpose why the Dimension Mirror is in this game. So I think it's best we talk about the end point of the game. So as Kirby traverses through the land of Floralia, he then corners Taranza with King Deity. And Taranza's reasoning of kidnapping King Deity in the first place is that the citizens of the land, in a last-ditch effort, summon a seed down into Dreamland, as they hope that it could bring the hero of the land to save them. But Taranza was one step ahead and decides to bring the hero themselves to Floralia. And this leads to a really cool boss fight with Masked Deity, which is always cool because Masked Deity has my favorite theme in the entire Kirby series ever. It's pretty much King Deity's already great tune, but cranked up to freaking 11. So why in the loving did this song never appear in a Smash game? It was right there! I mean, they had Masked Deity as the So as Kirby was able to knock down Deity, Taranza then slowly realized that Kirby was actually the real hero, and he captured the wrong person. And so for a last-ditch effort, he then summons his master, and the main villain of Kirby Triple Deluxe, Queen Sectonia. Now this character in Taranza has a really fascinating backstory if you look really deep into it. So a long time ago, Sectonia used to be best friends with Taranza, and they had a good life. But one day, Taranza was able to retrieve the Dimension Mirror, which is why it suddenly appears in Triple Deluxe through the DDD Tour. However, the mirror itself had a stranglehold on Sectonia as she slowly became more twisted and obsessed with power and beauty. Throughout various arts and such, you could tell that her appearance used to be similar to Taranza, but the more she got more obsessive with power, she slowly became more and more of a realistic looking wasp. And then she pretty much took over the land as a dictator, with Taranza being pretty much in second command. However, their friendship now is pretty much one-sided, as the friend Taranza once knew is pretty much gone now. Which is pretty sad to emphasize the fact that once she called for help, she then swatted him away, where she was able to fight Kirby, and she then goes down just like that. However, Taranza has one little trick up her sleeve, as she then merges it with the Dreamstalk to take over both Floralia and Dreamland. And so it's time for the final battle, and I've gotta say, I really love the background in this boss fight. It is very stunning. I like how when you start the boss fight, the background is pretty much a full moon where it's nighttime, but as the boss fight progresses, it slowly becomes morning. Ending things off with Sectonia capturing Kirby, but he was saved by King Deity, where he grabs one final miracle fruit. Kirby then inhales Sectonia's attacks, ending things off with one final blow. Queen Sectonia has been defeated, and that concludes Kirby's Triple Deluxe. And overall, still pretty darn good. This is still a phenomenal Kirby game for 3DS. It pretty much polishes things up with Kirby's Return to Dreamland, adds some new things to it, and it feels completely new and fresh. That HyperNova ability Kirby can do is pretty much a great shakeup with a traditional move Kirby can always do. If you're very curious on the newer Kirby games, I highly recommend trying out Triple Deluxe, and the other ones for the most part, because they're all really good. Although I would be down if this gets a console release for Nintendo Switch. I mean, recently they did remake Return to Dreamland, so who knows. Watch as I upload this video, then suddenly a few weeks later they announced Kirby's Triple Deluxe Deluxe. But whatever Kirby has in the future, whether it's a remake or a brand new game, I cannot wait. But that'll do it for today, so thank you for watching and I'll see you later. Bye-bye!